Prediction markets price Russian direct intervention at 18%, but conditional probability spikes to 47% if Strait of Hormuz closure lasts 30+ days. The gap between alliance rhetoric and military capacity is where the forecast diverges. Russian direct military intervention in a US-Iran conflict currently prices at 18% on institutional forecasting platforms. That number collapses the narrative of inevitable alliance warfare. Today we examine the capacity constraints, historical proxy precedents, and the specific trigger conditions that would spike that probability to 47%. Turning first to the capacity constraint anchoring this assessment. Russia's sustained operations in Ukraine have imposed structural limitations that no amount of rhetorical alignment can overcome. Open-source intelligence aggregates document cumulative losses exceeding 3,500 main battle tanks, 5,000 armored fighting vehicles, and substantial stocks of precision-guided munitions, with production rates constrained by sanctions on microelectronics and machine tools. Manpower data reveals parallel pressures. Despite expanded recruitment bonuses and partial mobilization measures, active duty shortfalls persist amid demographic contraction and reported casualty figures that have reduced available combat-effective units. These realities translate directly into operational trade-offs. Geographically, simultaneous major theater commitments are nearly prohibitive. The Ukrainian front absorbs the majority of Russia's ground maneuver forces, air defense assets, and logistical trains along a 1,000-kilometer contested line. Projecting equivalent capability into the Persian Gulf theater would require secure transit across contested sea lanes or overland corridors exceeding 2,000 kilometers, exposing supply lines to interdiction, while the primary theater remains unresolved. Institutional risk models calibrated across multiple forecasting platforms assign less than 10% probability to Russia sustaining high-intensity operations in two distant theaters without catastrophic degradation in at least one. This is not a question of political intent, but of arithmetic, finite inventory, finite personnel, and finite industrial throughput. The 18% baseline reflects exactly this calculus, pricing the physical impossibility of dual-front dominance. Shifting to historical precedent eliminates the behavioral pattern behind current pricing. Russia's 2015 to 2023 intervention in Syria operated strictly within a proxy framework. Sustained air operations from Khmeimim Air Base, coordination with local ground partners, and deployment of special operations elements and private military companies, none of which escalated to direct exchange of fire with the United States or NATO forces. Even during acute flashpoints, the April 2018 coalition strikes on Syrian chemical sites, the February 2018 Deir ez-Zor incident involving Russian contractors, or the 2017 Shayrat missile response, the confliction hotlines held, and Moscow refrained from kinetic retaliation against Western assets. This mirrors broader Cold War risk calibration. Soviet support in Korea, Vietnam, and Angola remained indirect precisely to avoid crossing the threshold of superpower confrontation. Prediction market archives from the 2018 Syria crisis provide direct calibration data. At peak rhetorical tension following the Duma incident, aggregated institutional forecasts for Russian direct military retaliation against US forces peaked briefly near 22% before collapsing to single digits within days once communication protocols confirmed mutual restraint. Contemporary pricing exhibits identical mean reversion behavior. Rhetoric from Moscow and Tehran generates short-term volatility, yet the market rapidly recalibrates to reflect documented operational boundaries. The forecast therefore distinguishes performative solidarity from the documented preference for calibrated, low-footprint engagement. Alliance mechanics further refine definition of intervention itself. Bilateral instruments between Russia and Iran, including the 2022 Comprehensive Strategic Partnership and subsequent defense cooperation memoranda, facilitate arms transfers, joint exercises, and intelligence channels but contain no Article 5-style mutual defense obligation. Support remains discretionary, governed by sovereign interest calculations rather than treaty trigger. In practice, escalation would likely proceed in measured increments. Advisory teams and training cadres already and quantify. For risk professionals requiring real-time scenario modeling and live updates on these layered assessments, the geopolitical forecasting infrastructure at today.me/future_tradebot supplies the granular conditional curves and trigger thresholds essential for institutional observation and portfolio-level risk calibration. The 47% conditional spike materializes only under a narrow convergence of material threats. Primary among them is sustained closure of the Strait of Hormuz beyond 30 days, an event that would compress global energy flows and generate second-order effects on Russian budgetary stability, while simultaneously elevating the perceived risk to forward-deployed Russian advisory and technical personnel. Additional catalysts include U.S. strike packages that directly or collaterally degrade Russian-linked assets in Iran or Western Syria, or destabilizing spillover from the Caucasus corridor that threatens Russia's southern military districts and energy transit infrastructure. In these tightly defined circumstances, the incentive structure narrows. Protective escalation becomes a rational marginal adjustment rather than ideological choice. Importantly, even under this tail scenario, the implied probability of continued non-intervention remains 53%, underscoring the elevated threshold required for any shift. In summary, the intervention threshold for Russian direct military engagement rests on capacity ceilings that Ukraine has already tested to their limit, on historical patterns of proxy restraint that have held through prior crises, on discretionary rather than obligatory alliance mechanics, and on specific high-impact triggers that remain probabilistically remote. The 18% baseline